All right, all right, all right. Jesus Christ. Yes, okay, I'll speak about the Hungarian referendum. Christ. There were like 20 emails in the last 24 hours. Hey, what about the Hungarian referendum? Yeah, what about it? Alright, so for those of you who don't know or haven't read the news lately, Hungary had a referendum with the question, do you agree with the European Union being allowed to force or to impose immigration quotas on Hungary even without the approval of the parliament? And the options were, of course, yes and no, and 98% of the people that bothered to go to the ballot box said no. So 98% of those who did vote. Now the turnout, the actual number of people that went to the vote were 44% of the total voting age population. So that officially means that the referendum did not pass. But even so, the outlets like The Independent, for instance, came out with such ridiculous headlines like a severe blow for Viktor Orban. Well, not really. Not really. But then again, it's The Independent. We shouldn't be expecting too much from them. Anyway, the referendum did show something, namely that there were more Hungarians who voted against the EU diversity quota than Hungarians who voted in favor of joining the European Union back in 2003. Now, for those of you who don't know, the referendum that posed the question of joining the EU to Hungarians in 2003 also did not gather a 50% plus one turnout to be deemed valid. There were 49.2%, if I recall correctly, was the turnout back then. And even so, the Hungary did join the EU 1 year later. So, in effect, the referendum was valid, even though it did not reach the minimum turnout threshold. The same might be true with this one, but nevertheless, even if not, it still does mean that a lot more people numerically and proportionally voted against the EU quota than for joining the European Union. So this begs the question, if that one was okay, then why shouldn't this one be okay? And it also does kind of show that there are significantly shifted attitudes, to put it mildly, than what was the case 13 years ago. Now, throughout the campaign of this referendum, the left refused the debate altogether in the open market of ideas, and instead invested millions of euros, or billions of forints if you want, in a not-so-stealth campaign of persuading the voters to basically stay at home and boycott the vote. And this is a tactic that, mind you, is routinely used by groups who know that they don't have the public opinion on their side in a referendum. Now, in the case of Hungary, only the formation Magyar Liberális Párt, that would be the Hungarian Liberal Party, actively campaigned for the yes side of this referendum, and Guy Verhofstadt, the leader of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe group, was hilariously involved in the campaign, showing once again how little former Western Bloc politicians really do understand about this part of the planet. Anyway, so the referendum came and passed. We know the results. Now what? Well, for starters, this referendum was sold, and as in sold, right from the get-go, as having a rather consultative value rather than being a binding referendum. Now, this was a very smart move, not because anyone doubted that the majority of the voters coming at the ballot box would disagree with the government's position or with Viktor Orban's position, but having it as a non-binding provides the best possible political ammunition regardless of the result. In this case, the only question was whether the minimum turnout threshold would be fulfilled or not. It was not, so this means Orban cannot use a fully populist argument when saying no to the bully boys in Brussels, but he can, and quite frankly I would be very surprised if he won't, he can use the exact argument that I basically delivered earlier. More people voted against EU diversity quotas than voted for joining the EU. Now, the percentage of voters clearly against the EU policy was actually higher than the percentage of Brexit voters. So there is quite enough of a solid political argument to be made regardless with this referendum. And I would be very surprised if Orban will not use these exact arguments in the coming months and throughout the next year, basically. Now, with that said, there is also something to be said on Hungarian politics in general. Now, referenda rarely reach that minimum threshold in Hungary to begin with. Heck, this was the 8th referendum since the fall of communism, and of these 8, exactly 2 passed, and both of those that passed were multi-question referenda. One was held in 2008 and got a 50.49% turnout on policies regarding national health care, and the other one was held all the way back in 1989, and it was about the punishment of former communist officials and the kickstarting of the country's transition from communism back to, sanity. That would be pretty much it. I mean, even the NATO membership referendum was good enough, even though it had only a 49.2% turnout. All the other referenda held in the country since the fall of communism failed to reach the minimum threshold, regardless of the theme, regardless of who initiated them. And with that in mind, I would have to agree with a chap named Tamás Boros, an analyst at the political research and consultancy firm Policy Solutions, who said that, quote, considering there was hardly any counter-campaign and that they, that would be the government, spent some 50 million euros and everyone on the right took up the issues wholeheartedly, it is an embarrassing but not totally catastrophic defeat for Orban. It is his first national defeat since 2006, the first time in a decade that the Prime Minister cannot impose his will. With an invalid result, it is harder for Orban to claim he holds all the aces against Brussels. The EU will see that while there is a majority against the quota, it is not the most important issue for Hungarians. And he is correct, and he is correct to frame it in these biased terms, because the EU, as we've come to expect, will not give a flying toss on the fact that referenda in general aren't really that galvanizing in Hungary as a rule. He is also correct that while it is indeed embarrassing for Orban, and let's face it, it is not a catastrophe. Now, over the medium and long run, this referendum did open the Pandora's box on the fact that EU's policies are fair game for referenda. Now, why not have a similar referendum in Slovakia or in Bulgaria, where they recently banned the burqa, by the way? And I would go one step further and say, why not referenda on membership suspension until the current commission is fired? I mean, the EU officials occasionally complain, though they don't really complain. They're actually quite happy with the status quo, but they use this for complaining whenever they're asked about the EU's democratic deficit. So they complain that the citizens aren't more involved at the European level. Well, referenda are a good way of being involved, methinks. So why not a referenda on suspending a country's contributions and voting rights until a new European Commission is appointed? You know, a protest vote, if you like. If the European Commission really wants to play this government of Europe role, then they should get accustomed with how most national governments operate on this continent. I mean, political stability really is the absolute exception in Europe, and definitely not the rule. The rule is to have prime ministers removed through a vote of no confidence by the parliament, or prime ministers stepping down as a gesture of honor when they screw it up badly, like it was the case with David Cameron in the United Kingdom. Yet, for some reason, the Prime Minister, Jean-Claude Juncker, and the government, that would be the Commission, are supposed to have a trouble-free tenure, just like the previous commies, such as the Maoist-led Barroso Commission. Why? Why not start having some dynamism at the top of the EU like we have on national governments? Now that's what I would push. If EU policies are fair game for referenda, why not the whole policy of and practice of the Commission? Anyway, I did stray a little bit from the original topic. So the bottom line is that nothing of significance was lost with the result of this referendum. Orban's government can continue its policy of keeping diversity at bay, and Orban himself still has gained some extra political ammunition to use in Brussels, even though these tools come with some shortcomings because of the invalidity threshold. I saw a few very disappointed statuses on social media, but frankly I'm not surprised, nor do I feel let down by Hungarians. I mean, sure, I was hoping for a 50% turnout, just enough to tip it over the threshold, just like the 50.49% turnout at the 2008 referendum, but I was just hoping. I knew that referenda don't generally galvanize the electorate for better and for worse. It's just Hungarian politics. They work that way and have been since '89. Anyway, the dispute is not over, and I trust Orban is smart enough to use the result as efficiently as possible. And again, as piece of evidence of the fact that he's not taking the 44% turnout result at heart, the Hungarian government just started a program to employ civilians, to train them for 6 months, and use those civilians as extra border patrol, basically. So, the whole program of keeping diversity at bay continues in Hungary. Nothing changes. And as far as I'm concerned, the entire democratic exercise can be very useful politically, for the simple fact that, again, more Hungarians voted against the diversity quota than for joining the EU itself. And that's pretty much it. We'll just have to wait to see what happens. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.